Welcome to Swai Files. I am Swai.
Jame, where are you? Jame, can you see us? Where are you? Come back, it's getting dark.
These were the desperate cries of Jame's two friends, searching for him in the cold and dark forest. In the biting cold of the ice-capped mountains, three men embarked on a hunting trip, unaware that only two would return. James Craven, a seasoned hunter, always confident in his skills, would soon face something no weapon or expertise could fend off: his own mysterious disappearance. As darkness descended and strange sounds began to creep through the thick fog, was this merely an accident, or was there an invisible force stalking them? And why, after that trip, did James Craven become one of the greatest mysteries of these deadly mountains? We go back to October 2017. James Craven, a veteran hunter with more than 20 years of experience, never imagined that this hunting trip would be the last of his life. Along with his two close friends, Alex and Will, James decided to take on the challenge of the wild ice-capped mountains to hunt a rare species of deer that could only be found there. The ice-capped mountains were not a hospitable place for anyone, not even for the most seasoned hunters. With treacherous terrain, harsh weather, and dense forests that seemed like endless mazes, it was a mystery that had never been fully explored. James, always thorough in his preparations, brought all the necessary gear, including a sleeping bag, tent, food for several days, and a heavy hunting rifle. But from the moment they set foot in the ice-capped mountains, strange signs began to appear. The sky darkened faster than expected, and a thick fog rolled in as if concealing something mysterious. The air seemed frozen, colder than usual, and every sound was swallowed by the void. James sensed something was wrong, but instead of worrying, he simply shrugged it off, thinking it was just the fatigue from a long journey. On the very first day, misfortune struck. Just a few miles into the forest, James suddenly discovered that his sleeping bag and some other important items had mysteriously disappeared. He clearly remembered checking everything carefully before departure, but now those items were gone. He became angry, lost his temper, and negative emotions quickly spread throughout the group. Alex and Will tried to calm James, but he was no longer his usual calm self. He started blaming everything, from the difficult terrain to the group's lack of preparation. James's mental state quickly crumbled. The stories the locals had told about the ice-capped mountains suddenly flooded back into his mind. Tales of lost souls, people who disappeared without a trace and never returned. Every small sound in the forest now startled James. Sounds like light footsteps, the wind brushing through the trees. Everything seemed to surround them, but no one was there. Although Alex and Will tried to explain that it was just fatigue, James couldn't stop thinking about those dark stories. As time passed, James's anxiety grew. The atmosphere between the three men turned as cold as the land they were standing on. Every attempt by Alex and Will to restore James's morale failed. Once the group's pillar of strength, James became uncooperative, frequently irritable and impatient. Each step felt heavier, and his eyes no longer held the bright confidence of a seasoned hunter. The group pressed on, but no one could deny that the mysterious loss of gear was only the beginning. James Craven had not only lost the essential items for the hunting trip, but perhaps he had also lost his sanity and self-control, things far more important when facing the harsh wilderness. Ahead of them, the ice-capped mountains stood still and cold, as if waiting for something. And in that silence, James's fate seemed sealed, with no one knowing what horrors lay ahead. That day, the group stopped at a desolate spot near a foggy crossroads in Frost Valley, where sunlight seemed unable to penetrate the thick canopy of trees. After many days of searching for traces of the rare deer, failure and exhaustion had drained the hunters. While Alex and Will patiently sat and discussed strategies, James seemed unable to endure any longer. He constantly gazed toward the horizon, his sharp hunter's eyes now filled with uncertainty. A nameless unease seemed to cloud his mind. That afternoon, James suddenly announced that he would go alone to Crystal Lake, a lake deep in the forest where the group had hidden some supplies from a previous trip. Crystal Lake was not an easy place to find, and going there alone in the dangerous wilderness was a risky decision. But James no longer seemed to listen to reason.
I'll go retrieve the tent and stove from last time. We need them to fight this cold,
he said with an oddly calm voice, as if this was something he had long planned. But deep down, Alex and Will sensed that something was wrong. James wasn't just going to get supplies, he was trying to escape something. Alex looked at James, his eyes no longer focused and alert as they usually were. James seemed more anxious than usual, evident in his quick glances and the way his hand gripped his bowstring tightly, as if ready for something unnamed.
James, are you sure you'll be fine going alone? This isn't something simple. If something happens to you...
Alex hesitated, but James didn't let the words sink in. He walked away, his tall figure quickly blending into the thick fog and darkness of the forest. Time passed slowly as Alex and Will tried to maintain contact with James via radio. At first, everything seemed fine. Around noon, James reported that he was somewhere between Crystal Lake and a small trail. He said he had walked about 7 miles from camp and hoped to find the turnoff soon. But there was something unsettling in James's voice. Though he had walked 7 miles, James didn't sound excited or eager to reach his destination. Instead, his tone was vague, as if he was no longer sure of his location. By late afternoon, Alex and Will finally bagged a deer. They quickly reached out to James to share the good news, but his response was the complete opposite of what they expected. James's voice came through weakly over the radio.
I think I missed the turn. I probably won't make it back to camp tonight.
That was the last thing Alex and Will heard from James. He didn't sound worried, but the calmness in his voice made everything seem even stranger, as if James had accepted something inexplicable. From that moment, all attempts to contact James failed. Silence engulfed the forest, and Alex and Will began to fear the worst. Stories of mysterious disappearances in the deep woods flooded their minds. Shadows of the past and of the ice-capped mountains itself seemed to haunt their every step. They knew James was tough, but something had driven him away and caused him to vanish mysteriously. Night fell faster than usual, and a snowstorm began to rage, like a grim warning of what awaited James Craven in the darkness of the ice-capped mountains. On October 16, 2017, the ice-capped mountains woke up to a gloomy atmosphere filled with anticipation. Alex and Will, after a sleepless night by the fire, began to feel the growing anxiety. James Craven, their companion, had been missing since the night before, after heading alone toward Crystal Lake. The radio no longer picked up his signal, and the biting cold wind of the forest felt more threatening than ever. No one knew they were at the beginning of a horrifying story, where their search efforts would gradually be swallowed by the darkness of the mysterious forest. As the faint morning light filtered through the ancient trees, Alex and Will decided they couldn't wait any longer. James, once strong and decisive, had vanished without a trace, and they had to do something. They couldn't leave him alone in the forest. They began packing up their gear, checking their supplies, and preparing to embark on the search. But both of them knew well that Frost Valley was not an easy place. It had long been notorious for ghost stories, strange disappearances, and its deadly silence. At 9 a.m., Alex and Will set out on their journey. They followed James's path along the trail leading to Crystal Lake. But their worry quickly turned into fear as they covered mile after mile without finding any trace of James. A thick fog blanketed the forest, making everything around them seem blurry and mysterious. The only footprints in the damp ground were their own. There were no signs of James, no broken branches or any indication that he had passed through. Suddenly, around 11:30 a.m., as they ventured deeper into the forest, a strong gust of wind blew through, carrying with it the eerie howling of the trees. But the wind was not just wind. It carried another sound, like a distant whisper, echoing from somewhere in the dense woods. Alex stopped, his breath catching. "Did you hear that?" he asked, his voice tense. Will nodded, his eyes wide, staring into the darkness ahead. "That's not normal wind," Will said, his voice trembling. The two continued walking, but now fear had overtaken all rational thought. Every step seemed to take them deeper into an unfamiliar place, as if the forest was changing, no longer resembling the path they had taken the day before. The atmosphere grew heavier, each breath stifled by the deadly silence. Everything felt strange and unnatural. The birds had long stopped singing, and even the usual wildlife like deer and rabbits had vanished without a trace. At 1 p.m., as the sunlight began to fade, Alex and Will found the first clue, a glove. It lay beneath an ancient tree, a few meters off the trail. Alex bent down and picked it up, immediately recognizing it as James's. His heart sank. "He's definitely been here," he said, his voice hoarse. But why had James left his glove behind? And more importantly, why hadn't he returned to camp? As they continued a few more miles, they suddenly heard another sound. Footsteps coming from ahead. These weren't the footsteps of a wild animal. They were the heavy steps of someone moving slowly through the dry leaves underfoot. Alex and Will froze, holding their breath. "James!" Alex called out loudly, but there was no response. The footsteps continued, slow and haunting, as if someone was approaching them. Alex pulled out the radio, hoping that James might hear them. "James, if you can hear us, please respond." But all they got in return was the cold static of the radio. As the sky turned a pale gray and the shadows grew longer, Alex and Will felt something different was watching them. It wasn't James. It was something invisible, not of this world. The darkness of ice cap seemed to want to consume them, and every step was now shrouded in an inexplicable fear. By 4 p.m., they decided to turn back to camp as the last light was about to fade. But as they turned around, they noticed something that terrified them. Footprints. Clear footprints of a person, but not theirs, and not James's. The footprints appeared behind them, right on the path they had just walked, as if someone or something had been following them all along. The search for James Craven was no longer just a journey into the deep forest, but a race against the darkness, against the lurking fear, and against an invisible force that was chasing them. On October 17, 2017, ice cap remained shrouded in the mystery of unanswered questions. Alex and Will returned to camp with heavy hearts. They had found a few traces of James, but nothing clear enough to determine if he was still alive. The feeling of being watched weighed down on them, and the strange footprints behind them only added to their growing fear. At 6 p.m., the forest began to sink into complete darkness. The wind blew harder, carrying with it the chilling howls of the ancient trees. The campfire flickered, but it wasn't enough to drive away the fear that engulfed them. Alex and Will sat across from each other, but the silence between them made them feel more distant than ever. The firelight reflected in Alex's eyes, and he couldn't stop himself from thinking about the worst that might have happened to James. "Do you think he's still alive?" Will whispered, his voice trembling like the wind outside. Alex didn't answer immediately. He had once thought James was just lost, maybe injured somewhere, but the more signs they found, the clearer it became that something far more terrible had occurred. "I don't know, but one thing I'm sure of, we can't stay here forever. If we don't find James by tomorrow morning, we'll have to leave this place," Alex said after a long pause, his eyes staring into the fire. Will nodded, but both knew that returning to camp without James would be an unacceptable failure. They had come here together, and no one wanted to leave a friend behind. Night fell, and the sounds around them grew stranger. It wasn't just the wind howling through the trees anymore. There were unfamiliar noises, like the sound of claws scratching the ground, heavy sighs echoing in the air. Alex turned around several times to look down the path they had walked, as if expecting something to emerge from the darkness. But there was nothing. Still, the feeling of being watched wouldn't leave them. Around 2 a.m., as they drifted into a fitful sleep, a loud noise echoed from deep within the forest. It sounded like something large crashing into the trees, followed by a horrifying scream. Alex and Will immediately jumped up, weapons in hand, ready to defend themselves. Alex called out for James, but there was no response. Only the terrifying silence remained. The campfire flared up for a brief moment, then quickly died down, leaving the entire forest in darkness. Neither dared to speak. Alex and Will both knew that whatever had caused the noise wasn't James, and it wasn't any animal they were familiar with. They looked at each other in the dim flashlight beams, and in that moment they understood they were no longer alone in the forest. The next morning, on October 18th, their search continued, but not just for James. They also wanted to uncover the truth about what was happening in the forest. The signs of a strange presence were becoming more apparent. As they retraced their steps along the old trail to Crystal Lake, Alex discovered something strange. A trail of blood on the ground. It led deep into the forest but disappeared into thin air, as if the blood had vanished into the sky. They kept moving, but every step felt heavier now, and the feeling of being watched had turned into a clear fear. It wasn't just the darkness. Something real was out there in the ice-capped forest, and it was playing a game of cat and mouse with them. By 11 a.m., they were nearing Crystal Lake, but what they saw left them both speechless. On the shore, where the still water lay like a black mirror, they found an old, tattered tent. Not theirs, and certainly not James's. The tent sat in the middle of a desolate clearing, torn apart, surrounded by strange signs of destruction. Broken branches, scattered rocks, and torn fabric hung from the bushes like pieces of a story they couldn't comprehend. Alex and Will didn't dare go any closer. A chilling, haunting feeling enveloped them. James Craven had disappeared without a trace, but something bigger and more terrifying was waiting, covering the forest and burying the mysteries that no one dared to face. On October 19, 2017, Icecap remained unnervingly silent. After a long night filled with tension and anxiety, Alex and Will woke up with growing fear, as there was still no sign of James Craven. All efforts to reach him via radio were in vain, with nothing but empty static, as if the signal was being blocked by something invisible in the wild forest. Their eyes grew dull, and worry was etched on their faces as they realized that James had been missing all night, without a single explanation or trace left behind. Before the sun could rise, the sky was already dark, signaling an incoming snowstorm. "We can't wait anymore. We have to call for a rescue team," Alex said, his voice tense, trying to suppress the rising fear. Will nodded, saying nothing, his eyes focused on the towering trees where, just hours before, James had disappeared into the darkness. By 9 a.m., Alex and Will had contacted local authorities to report James's disappearance. A rescue team was immediately mobilized, including helicopters and ground search teams. From the air, helicopters used advanced technology like thermal cameras and reflectance technology to search for traces of James. However, the harsh weather conditions began to pose a serious challenge. The snowstorm suddenly hit, with heavy snowfall limiting the visibility of the search teams and reducing the effectiveness of the equipment. From the air, everything turned into a white blanket. The dense forest areas were covered in snow, and the trails disappeared without a trace. The helicopter circled the area where Alex and Will believed James had passed, but there was no sign of him. As the hours passed, waves of cold wind sliced through the forest, sweeping the snow like pieces of a raging storm. On the ground, the search teams also faced numerous difficulties. They combed through every small sign, from broken branches to faint footprints in the dirt, but everything seemed to have been wiped clean by the storm. The snow began to cover everything, as if trying to bury the mystery of James Craven along with the unexplained events. By 3 p.m., as the storm worsened, the rescue teams were forced to retreat to a temporary camp for their own safety. Alex and Will sat quietly in their tent, their eyes fixed on the entrance, unable to stop their racing thoughts. They knew that with every passing minute, the chances of finding James alive were growing slim. The locals' warnings about ice cap echoed in their minds, about those who had disappeared in the forest and were never found. As night fell once again, the entire search area was engulfed in darkness and terrifying cold. The snow continued to fall heavily, covering any remaining traces of James. The light from flashlights and the helicopter's searchlights could only cut through a short distance before being swallowed by the thick snow. Despite having modern technology, the rescue team couldn't pierce through the frightening curtain of the snowstorm. "Will we find him?" Will blurted out, his voice trembling not just from the cold but from the heavy fear in his heart. Alex didn't answer, his eyes lost as he stared into the small fire in front of him, a fragile flame amid the raging storm. Both of them understood that the chances of finding James Craven alive in this snowstorm were now nothing short of a miracle. And in the endless cold of ice cap, that hope seemed to be sinking, just as James had been swallowed by the forest, leaving no trace behind. The search continued, but with each passing hour, the feeling of helplessness grew. Ice-capped mountains were not just a cold and harsh place. They felt like an invisible force, ready to hide away the darkest secrets, never revealing them to the light. The rescue teams and modern equipment returned to the search area, but the hope of finding James alive grew dimmer by the minute. The snow had stopped falling, leaving behind a bleak and icy canvas of the forest. But instead of making things clearer, the snow only hid the deeper mysteries of the place. Around 10 a.m., the rescue team finally discovered the first sign, a glove lying on the snow near a cliff, about 5 miles east of the camp. It was James Craven's glove. When Alex and Will heard the news, they rushed to the scene. Fear flooded them, but so did a flicker of hope that James might still be alive. However, what troubled them was the location of the glove. There were no tracks leading to or away from it. It was as if it had been placed there from above, in an open space with no footprints or any sign of movement. The rescue team continued searching the area, but the second discovery made everything even stranger. At around 1 p.m., not far from the glove, they found another object, James's backpack, standing upright against a barren tree covered in snow. But what horrified Alex and Will was that the backpack looked untouched. The zippers were intact, the food and water inside were still there, but there was no sign of James. Will knelt to examine the backpack, his hands trembling. "Why would he leave it here?" he whispered, staring at the backpack as if it held some kind of answer. No one in the rescue team could understand why James would leave his backpack in such a desolate area, especially given the cold and harsh conditions. But the strange discoveries didn't end there. Around 3 p.m., as a search team moved eastward, they found a series of faint footprints leading out of the forest. But these footprints weren't normal. They started off clear, as if someone had been walking with purpose. But as they moved farther, the footprints gradually disappeared, as if the person had slowly faded into thin air. This sparked various theories among the group. Had James become so disoriented that he walked off into the darkness? Or had something else pulled him into the forest, erasing all traces? The tension in the air grew as night approached. The signs of James were now like scattered pieces of a mysterious puzzle. but each piece only made the bigger picture blurrier. The sense of something strange and unnatural weighed heavily on the entire team. Alex and Will began to feel that ice-capped mountains were not just an ordinary wilderness. There was something mysterious, like a living entity watching them, waiting for them to uncover what it was hiding. By the end of the day, the final discovery sent chills down everyone's spine. Not far from where they found the backpack, they discovered 2 large footprints, pressed deeply into the snow, as if something heavy had been standing there, watching. But these footprints didn't belong to James, nor to any animal they knew. They were pressed deep into the ground, as if something had stood there for a long time and then suddenly vanished. Ice-capped mountains, with their cold and deadly beauty, were no longer just the place where James Craven disappeared. They had become a nightmare that no one could explain. A place where the laws of nature seemed to have been overturned, and darkness was no longer just darkness. It was a force silently consuming all traces of those who dared to step into this land. On October 20th, 2017, the ice-capped mountains had become more than just a forest. It had turned into a deep mystery, swallowing anyone who dared to enter. The strange discoveries from the previous day left a cloud of fear hanging over Alex, Will, and the entire rescue team. The strange footprints, the untouched backpack, and especially the 2 large, deep footprints in the snow that didn't belong to James, all raised unanswered questions. That morning, the tension was palpable. Alex and Will knew that time was against them. If James was still alive, the freezing temperatures and sudden storms in the mountains wouldn't give him much time. But there was something else in the forest. Something both of them could feel, but didn't dare say aloud. That made them understand James wasn't just lost. He may have been pulled into something none of them were ready to face. At 8 a.m., the rescue team received new information. One of the search groups had found another set of strange footprints, not far from where the backpack was discovered. The footprints were no longer as clear as before. But the strange thing was that they abruptly stopped in the middle of a clearing. There was no sign of further movement, no escape route. It was as if James or something else had disappeared into thin air. This time, the strangeness not only worried the team members, but also began to make them uneasy. Was there someone in the forest? Or was something beyond their understanding happening? At 10 a.m., the rescue teams deployed helicopters again, trying to cover as much ground as they could. This time, they discovered another strange phenomenon, a burnt circle in the snow, located about 7 miles southwest of the forest edge. The circle wasn't large, but it was clearly scorched by fire. Although thick snow had since covered it, the burn marks remained distinct. Alex and Will were flown to the scene and immediately felt the eerie atmosphere. There were no signs of a campfire or anything resembling human activity. The burnt circle looked as if it had appeared naturally, with no footprints or materials nearby. Alex picked up a small piece of charcoal from the circle, a cold chill running down his spine. "This isn't right," he whispered. "James couldn't have been here. He couldn't have done this himself." Will didn't respond, but the worry in his eyes was obvious. Both of them knew something was very wrong. The ice-capped mountains had turned into a nightmare, where every clue seemed to lead them into an endless loop with no way out. Each new discovery made the story more complex, more mysterious, and more terrifying. As the afternoon approached, snow began to fall again, forcing the rescue team to narrow their search. The weather grew harsher by the hour, and the impending storm could render the search for James hopeless. The group prepared to return to camp, but Alex insisted on staying a few more hours. He felt like they were getting closer to something, but what, he couldn't say. At 4 p.m., as the last rays of the sun were obscured by thick snow clouds, a member of the rescue team found something that sent chills through everyone. In a remote area deep within the forest, about 2 miles from the burnt circle, they found a shoe. It was James's shoe, but it was in a completely strange and eerie location. The shoe was covered in snow, but there were no signs of James having passed through. The shoe lay there alone, like a mysterious message, as if it had been placed there by an invisible hand. Alex knelt down, picked up the shoe, his heart pounding. James was here, he said, his voice catching in his throat. But what had caused him to leave his shoe here? And why were there no other signs? At this point, the entire rescue team knew that something far more terrifying than any of the rumors about the ice-capped mountains was at play. A dark mystery was enveloping the forest, and James Craven, their friend, might have been drawn into that darkness with no way out. The storm began to intensify, snow falling heavily, and everyone was forced to head back. But in the minds of Alex and Will, the haunting image of the shoe and the burnt circle remained etched. No one knew what else the ice-capped mountains would reveal, but they knew that what they had seen was only the surface of a much darker secret, one that this forest would never allow them to fully uncover. On October 20th, 2017, the search for James Craven in Frost Valley officially entered its final phase. The fierce snowstorm the day before had buried all the traces they had found. Alex and Will, after days of fruitless searching, now had to face the difficult truth. James might have been swallowed by the forest forever, never to return. That morning, the sky remained gray and cold, with snow covering the ground like a white funeral shroud. The rescue team, now exhausted and worn out, gradually narrowed the search area. Helicopters circled above, but there was nothing to see beyond the thick blanket of snow reflecting the faint sunlight. Thermal scanners picked up no signs of life, and the strange footprints they had once found were erased. Alex and Will clung to the last shred of hope. They decided to spend the final morning searching around the area of the burnt circle and James's shoe. They knew this might be the last trace of their dear friend, and they wanted to understand what had happened. However, with each step, the feeling that James had completely disappeared grew stronger. The deadly silence of the forest, the gentle sound of falling snow, all seemed to form a funeral dirge that Frost Valley played just for James. By noon, Alex and Will approached the area of the burnt circle, which had chilled them the day before. But this time, something was different. The snow around the circle had begun to melt in a strange way, revealing the scorched ground beneath. Will knelt down, touching the cold, blackened earth. "Do you think it could have been a fire?" he asked. But there was something in his voice that suggested he didn't believe his own words. There were no signs of a recent forest fire or campfire, only an unsolvable mystery. Suddenly, a sound came from afar. It wasn't the wind or an animal, but something that sounded like a whisper echoing from deep within the forest. Alex and Will froze, straining to listen. The whisper grew clearer, as if someone was calling their names from a great distance, but the voice was unfamiliar. It was soft yet strangely captivating, pulling them toward the denser, darker part of the forest they had never ventured into. Alex looked at Will, his eyes showing concern. "We should head back," he whispered, though deep inside, he felt an invisible force drawing them in. Will hesitated for a moment, then nodded. They turned and began walking back toward the rescue camp. At 4 p.m., the rescue team officially called off the search. The snow was falling thicker, covering everything and making it impossible to continue. The advanced equipment had lost its usefulness, and the harsh weather made it unsafe for anyone to stay longer. Alex and Will stood silently, watching the helicopters lift off, carrying the rescue team and their last hope of finding James alive. In that moment, Alex came to a bitter realization. James Craven hadn't just disappeared. Something larger, more mysterious had happened in the forest. The ice-capped mountains had hidden James away, leaving behind only strange, haunting clues. The shoe, the burnt circle, the large footprints, and the feeling of being watched, all were pieces of a puzzle that would never be complete. Finally, as night fell and the icy winds began to blow again, Alex and Will quietly left the ice-capped mountains, leaving behind the mysteries that would never be solved. On June 21, 2019, Frost Valley continued to hold its secrets, and the disappearance of James Craven seemed to have reached a dead end. The official search had concluded, but the haunting memories of the strange clues in the forest never left Alex and Will. They returned to town, but the images of the shoe, the burnt circle, and the mysterious footprints in the snow lingered in their minds. It was as if an invitation from the deep woods still clung to them, urging them to return. On the afternoon of June 25th, unexpected news from local authorities made the case more bizarre than ever. A local farmer, while patrolling the edge of the forest bordering the ice-capped mountains, made a horrifying discovery: a jacket covered in mud and blood, lying among the weeds about a mile from the forest's edge. When authorities arrived at the scene, they quickly confirmed it was James Craven's jacket, but the disturbing part was that the top portion of the jacket had been torn as if something or someone had ripped it apart. This immediately raised a series of questions. If James had been in danger, why was the jacket found far from the previous search area? And more importantly, what or who had attacked James? Alex and Will were notified immediately, and they quickly returned to the scene to witness the discovery. When they saw the jacket, both could not hide their horror. "It's impossible," Alex muttered. "James couldn't have torn his jacket like this. What could have happened to him?" Investigators began to cordon off the area where the jacket was found and expanded the search once again. This time, it wasn't just a search. It was an investigation into the possibility that James had been attacked or pursued by something. Local police contacted biologists to see if it was possible that James had been attacked by a large animal like a bear, but there were no signs of animal activity in the area at the time. On the afternoon of June 26th, another investigative team ventured deeper into the northern region of the ice-capped mountains. They discovered a new set of tracks, footprints similar to those found earlier, but this time larger, deeper, and more unusual. The massive, abnormal footprints followed a shallow stream, as if something had walked carefully but with immense strength. Investigators couldn't determine what creature the prints belonged to, and they quickly disappeared as the snow fell heavier. The appearance of these tracks immediately unsettled everyone. Theories about something supernatural or otherworldly began to circulate among the investigation team. Some believed that James may have encountered a predator that wasn't human, a mysterious creature that had long been the subject of folklore surrounding Frost Valley. While the rumors of supernatural phenomena spread, something else added to the chilling nature of the case. On June 27th, a tip from a local resident reached the police, claiming that on the night James disappeared, they had seen strange lights from a distance, coming from the eastern forest. These lights weren't flashlights or vehicle headlights. They were flickering blue lights, as if something was emitting them from above. This coincided with the time James last made contact with Alex and Will over the radio, when he had said that something was watching him. The police continued investigating the origin of the lights, but no further clues were found. The ice-capped mountains held on to their secrets, and the new discoveries only heightened the fear and left more questions unanswered. In the end, James Craven's case became a complete mystery. The torn jacket, the inexplicable footprints, and the strange lights from the deep forest, all were pieces of a story no one dared to delve further into. James, the hunter who vanished in the forest, was no longer just a victim of nature, but perhaps part of a greater secret, something the ice-capped mountains had always kept hidden in its shadows. As winter deepened and snow continued to fall heavily on the trails, the ice-capped mountains return to their deadly silence, taking the story of James Craven into the darkness forever, leaving behind fear and haunting memories for those brave enough to step into the place. The first theory is that James may have suffered a terrible accident in the wilderness. In a state of panic and disorientation due to the harsh weather, he might have attempted to escape the forest, but became trapped by the very nature he once trusted. However, the large, inexplicable footprints, the mysterious burnt circle, and the torn jacket have cast doubt on this theory. Perhaps Ice-Capped Mountains is not merely an indifferent adversary to humans, but also harbors an inexplicable force. The second theory, though hard to believe, has garnered substantial support. James may have encountered a mysterious creature. The large, deep footprints in the snow have baffled investigators, and many have started to recall tales of legendary creatures living deep in the woods. Could it be that James came face to face with something beyond human understanding? A wild, undocumented beast? Or perhaps a mythical being from ancient legends? The third theory elevates the situation to a supernatural level. Some witnesses claim to have seen mysterious blue lights on the night James disappeared. These strange lights, combined with the burnt circle, have led many to believe that James may have been drawn into a supernatural phenomenon. Ice-Capped Mountains, with its long history of unsolved disappearances, might not be just a forest but a gateway between worlds, where supernatural events occasionally occur, trapping the unlucky souls who dare enter its domain. The final theory suggests that James voluntarily disappeared, or at least willingly put himself in a dangerous situation. Signs of psychological instability before his disappearance may have driven James on a confused journey, leading him deep into a part of the forest where no one could find him. But this doesn't explain the strange phenomena, the gigantic footprints, the burnt circle, or the eerie silence of the forest afterward. The outcome of James Craven's disappearance remains an unsolvable mystery. In the cold silence of Ice-Capped Mountains, every clue has been concealed. Perhaps what happened to James is beyond human comprehension. The only certainty is that with each passing day, the forest becomes more enigmatic, like a living entity waiting for the next person to challenge it. Ice-Capped Mountains has swallowed James Craven into its darkness, and with every gust of wind through the ancient trees, the forest continues to guard its story. Someone will forever be lost in its dark history, while we can only stand from afar, gaze into the shadows, and wonder if the place still holds secrets yet to be revealed.